Hi, I'm Bob Herbert. Welcome to OpEd.tv. When we think of apprenticeships, we tend to think of on-the-job training in such fields as manufacturing or the building trades. It's easy, for example, to imagine an apprentice plumber or electrician. Those apprenticeships have been around for a long time, and they're still important. But now, a quarter of the way through the 21st century, we are deep into the era of technology and tech careers. That's where so many of the good jobs of today are being created, and that's one of the true speedways to a solid middle-class standard of living. My guest today believes apprenticeships in tech occupations is a terrific way to bring a lot more men and women into those fields, especially those who are in communities that are currently underserved when it comes to employment and educational opportunities. Technology apprenticeships? There aren't that many around, but is that an idea whose time has come? Let's ask Jonthan Bowles. He's the executive director of the Center for an Urban Future, a New York City think tank that is focused on some of the most important economic and social issues facing New York and other cities across the country. Jonthan, welcome. Thank you for coming in.
Thanks for having me.
So before we get into the specifics of tech apprenticeships, talk a little bit about the importance of the technology sector to the economy of New York in general and as a pathway to the middle class for city residents.
Yeah, well, technology has been around for a few decades in New York, tech jobs, but it really has been driving the growth of well-paying and middle-income jobs in New York City for the past 10 or 15 years. I mean, we've seen a lot of low-wage jobs growing in New York City. Home health care has been on the rise, social assistants, jobs at restaurants. So many of the jobs that are growing in New York pay really low wages and don't have a lot of opportunity for advancement. Tech is the big exception. When it comes to middle-class categories or high-income wage industries, a lot of them have been stagnant or seeing very little growth right now. For instance, manufacturing used to be such a solidly middle-class field in New York, continues to decline even in recent years. Hospitals have had some growth, but it hasn't been that meteoric in recent years. Other sectors have been fairly slow. And so tech is really where we're seeing middle and high-wage jobs in New York City. The problem is that it's a sector that doesn't really look like New York, right? While Black and Latino New Yorkers make up over 50% of the workforce in the city, just about 20% of folks in the tech sector employed are Black or Latino today.
So it's pretty easy, as I mentioned in the intro, for most of us to think about, apprenticeships in plumbing or electricians, how those apprenticeships might work. Much different. We don't have the same kind of clarity when we're talking about tech apprenticeships. So how would those apprenticeships work, and what kind of jobs are we talking about?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. I mean, it's really the same kind of model, right? For a lot of years, we saw apprenticeships be the route into these good-paying jobs in the building trades, in manufacturing. Right. Now the good jobs are in tech, and they require very specialized skills, right? A lot of people going into tech come with a college degree. But if we're going to elevate people without a college degree into those well-paying tech jobs, we need a kind of combination of education and on-the-job training. And that's what an apprenticeship does in tech. And so we're seeing some of that. You mentioned there's not that many of them. There's a few dozen or several dozen of them in New York City. They are starting to grow, but they're still fairly small scale. And the beauty of it is that while you're getting an education, perhaps at CUNY, you're also spending many hours a week at a tech company, working under a mentor, learning a skill, a job, not just any skill, but something that that company specifically needs.
Try to give us a little bit more of a specific idea of who would benefit from these apprenticeships. So, for example, who are they? How old are they? How much education have they had? Where do they live in New York City? What boroughs, or is it all 5 boroughs? And what are they doing now? Are they working? Are they going to school? Who would benefit?
Yeah, I think that this is when I mentioned that the sector right now doesn't look like New York. I mean, these are the folks that have been like kind of going through apprenticeship programs, New Yorkers of color, people from low-income backgrounds, really from all 5 boroughs. But like we're not seeing the same level of upward mobility in New York's economy across the board. Right now, something like 69% of all Manhattan residents have a bachelor's degree. In the Bronx, it's more like 25%. And so apprenticeships is kind of a great equalizer, giving opportunities to New Yorkers in the Bronx and throughout the 5 boroughs that don't have a college degree to kind of get into one of the better paying careers in New York City. Now, apprenticeships aren't for every single pathway, every single occupation in the tech field, but for a lot of even kind of basic kind of programmers, this is something that apprenticeships have been providing a pathway to. So people kind of get into one of these jobs, they work under someone. So for instance, Spotify is a company that has had apprenticeships. The podcast company that's been growing pretty significantly, they have had some apprenticeships. Barclays Bank, which is a bank, but increasingly the jobs that Barclays have are technology jobs. And
almost every profession, no matter what you're talking about, technology has become such a big deal.
It really is. Much of the growth is not actually in tech companies, but in banks, in healthcare companies, hospitals, and education companies. So for a lot of those companies, they're desperate for workers, right? This is a good thing for New Yorkers that are trying to get a pathway into the middle class, but for a lot of companies, they need workers. They need trained workers and employees, and this is a great opportunity for them to get them and to get them in the exact skill sets that they're looking for.
So you're touching on my next question, which is how do the companies themselves benefit? Because you need the companies to sign on to these programs. So can you go a little bit into that?
Yeah, I mean, we've seen across the economy, but especially in tech, that there are shortages of workers. They are struggling to find people with exactly the skills they need. And technology is a field where the skills are changing like every year, right? The things that they require, the technology itself is changing. So it's difficult even to recruit from a specific college or a training program because their needs often change. So that's why in apprenticeships, give them something that allows for kind of that nimbleness, that kind of flexibility to train as you go. And the training may be different for a Spotify versus Barclays for other tech companies. And so to have that individualized training and support is really ideal for these companies.
You've been talking essentially about diversifying the workforce in technology in New York City, and of course this could play out in other places as well. But diversity programs are under, as you would know as well as anyone, under widespread assault now. And very good programs are being sabotaged in Washington and elsewhere, not just in the federal government. How worried are you about that?
I mean, I'm very worried. We have a city that is an incredibly diverse city. We know that the future growth of our population and our workforce is only more diverse. And yet we have real disparities in terms of the college educated or population with bachelor's degrees. So we need to be investing in programs, not just apprenticeships, but a range of things that allow for companies of all kinds to be able to recruit from different parts of the city, from different populations, people with different backgrounds. And those people give real strength to companies. It's not just solving workforce shortages, it's that people bring different backgrounds and different set of skills to bear in those jobs. And so it's something that New York needs for our economy going forward. If we don't have programs that train people for the jobs of tomorrow, if we don't invest in CUNY, which 71% of the students at CUNY are low-income students, we're going to see major problems with our economy because this is a talent-driven economy, and companies that are going to grow here, they're going to need a continued labor pool.
I think it baffles me. I don't even know if this is a question. But if you have a pool of people, no matter who they are, and you're in a community, you're in a town, you're in a city, and you can put that pool to work in well-paying, solidly middle-class jobs on the one hand, or the alternative is the opposite of that. They're either finding difficulty finding work at all, or they're in low wage jobs, or their educational attainment is lower than it might have been. Do you have an idea of why it's so difficult to get people to understand that the first alternative is the better alternative? Are we just programmed that way as human beings, do you think? Why is that so difficult to grasp?
You know, I think that it's not that difficult to grasp, and I think that for a long time, up until very recently, I think most people in the city were grasping it, right? I think that from the leadership in City Hall to the governor's office in Albany, and so many corporations in the technology field were grasping that this was important, that we need to give people a kind of a lift up. We need to make sure that we have a rising number of middle-class residents in this city. That supports a strong city, civically. So all of this is important. I think where we're not seeing it is from people outside of New York. You know, the folks in Washington today that are ruling, right. This is a fairly recent thing, but I think a lot of people in New York get that this is good for the city.
There are, in fact, tech apprenticeships, and of course, this conversation is based on the idea that you're trying to establish more of them. So give us a little bit of an idea of what's actually being done. Who's trying to establish these apprenticeships? What kind of steps are being taken?
Yeah, there's a handful of technology companies and non-technology companies like banks that have tech roles. That have started apprenticeships. There's a range of different kind of apprenticeships and different kind of occupations. And the city of New York, through the office of Mayor Adams, has actually been investing in apprenticeships. In fact, one of the things we suggested when this administration came in is that they really should be expanding apprenticeship programs here. And they've gone big. The mayor has actually, Mayor Adams, one of the best things I think he's actually done is that he's really kind of set a goal to create 30,000 apprenticeships in New York City. Not all of them are in tech, but that's a big number. As a kind of a comparison, Mayor de Blasio before him set a goal for creating something like 400 new apprenticeships in New York. And so Mayor de Blasio kind of started the ball rolling, but at a fairly small scale, not thinking that ambitiously about this. And Mayor Adams has gone a lot bigger. And I think one of the things that the involvement of City Hall really does is that we need to kind of recruit and kind of make a case to businesses in New York that this is a good thing. Right? Some of them get it naturally, and there's already been some tech companies that have been embracing apprenticeships. But for others, you know, they need to be sold a little bit on it. They need to see that there are successes. It's a pretty significant investment. You know, like when you kind of train somebody for a job, you usually kind of hire them from a tech training organization, and they come in and they start right away. An apprenticeship, you usually give like a year or two commitment to do on-the-job training for that apprenticeship. And then at the end of the day, you're basically hiring that person. There's kind of an expectation that the company will hire that person. So that's a long cost for a company to invest in apprenticeships. It's worth it, we believe, but I think there's a little bit of selling that has to happen on the part of City Hall and other kind of public officials in New York to really make the case to bring more companies on board. Is it strictly government officials who have the responsibility of making the case, and if they are, well, you're going to tell me if there's anyone else. But once they're making the case, then what do they do? I mean, it's got to be more than simply asking a company to establish an apprenticeship. Yeah, no, it's not just the government. We've seen a couple of examples of like kind of intermediary organizations that kind of act as an intermediary between the business community and CUNY or hiring training organizations. So in New York, Jamie Dimon and some 29 other major corporations in New York City, obviously with JP Morgan Chase, but 30 or so major corporations kind of got involved in something called the New York Jobs CEO Council. So it's 30 of the leading companies in New York. And they are working to create, in each of their companies, they made a big commitment to hire apprenticeships in New York City. They see the value of these apprenticeships in tech, in finance, and they're in the process of working with the New York Jobs CEO Council to kind of provide candidates to them to kind of work with CUNY to get folks that they can kind of bring into apprenticeship programs. So that's a real sign of progress that's working in New York City. There are similar intermediaries nationally, like the organization 110 that's doing something similar. So we do have that kind of thing. The problem is that it is a big commitment, and also it can be pretty cumbersome for companies to engage in apprenticeships. So for instance, you can get credits, tax credits and others, if you do an apprenticeship program through New York State, but there's a lot of hoops to go through for these companies to do a formal, quote unquote, registered apprenticeship. Those registered apprenticeships were based on a model of years and years of apprenticeships into the building trades, into manufacturing. And tech is this kind of much more nimble industry.
Right.
Things are changing so much, so you have to go like 2 or 3 years through a process to get the state to register your specific apprenticeship program, which is based on a specific curriculum and a specific skill set that they're training for. By the time you get that, the skills in tech have changed. So we need to be much more nimble and flexible in kind of approving these apprenticeships. But those are some of the kind of challenges that we have to creating more of these.
Well, you mentioned there was a report that your organization did, the Center for an Urban Future. It was a terrific report. It was, on tech apprenticeships, overall. And there's a section in it that refers to the challenges in establishing these apprenticeships. And one of them was what you were just talking about, the registration process. So again, going back to the old idea of on-the-job training for an electrician or a plumber, or my father used to have upholstery shops in Montclair. You could have an apprenticeship for an upholsterer or a would-be upholsterer. I understand this, I think, but explain why in a tech apprenticeship you need the apprenticeship to be registered with the state. Why is that the case, and what is that process like? In other words, why can't you just have somebody come into a bank or come into a tech company and say, hey, here's a computer, and sit down and we're going to walk you through this, and here's your on-the-job training? Why do we need registration?
It's a good question. I think that
maybe we don't.
I think the reality is that there should be this box of different models of apprenticeship, especially for tech, right? Some of them may be the formal registered model. Some of them may be much more of an informal kind of that looks like what we call an apprenticeship-like program that is essentially on-the-job training that's modeled on an apprenticeship, but maybe doesn't have a formal registration process, maybe isn't quite 2 years in length like a lot of the apprenticeships. So we need to have the flexibility in tech to have different models for different companies and different needs. I think one of the reasons why people like registered apprenticeships is that there's protections in it for workers. Right? So if you kind of sign up for this company off the street that says they're having on-the-job training or apprenticeship, right, and you go through a year and a half of a program and you don't get a job in the end, that's a lot of your own time that you've invested in that program. Right. And so, we do want to have some basic kind of protections for workers, the people that are going through these apprenticeships right now. So that's one of the reasons why. The other reason is that you can get benefits, including tax credits, if you get a formal registered apprenticeship. That's important. When we have so few companies doing this, we ought to be encouraging more of them to start apprenticeships. If a tax credit is a way to do it, like we've done for other industries, why not? We should. But let's not kind of set up a goal that's impossible for those tech companies to reach in order to get the tax credit.
Now, you mentioned CUNY, and we're having this conversation in the terrific TV studio at the CUNY Graduate Center. So what role does City University have this is a two-part question. What role does CUNY play in bringing New Yorkers in general or does it play, or should it play, in bringing New Yorkers in general into the tech sector? And then specifically, what role can CUNY play in terms of establishing these tech apprenticeships?
Well, I'm glad you asked, because there's very few things that my organization has written more about than CUNY. We are such kind of supporters and boosters of the City University of New York. We think it is really, in today's economy, where so many of the good jobs are really in industries that are asking for at least a college degree or a credential. CUNY is the launch pad for economic mobility today. We know that's true. I think the challenge is that there are still a lot of pain points where students who enroll in the university are not finishing. They're kind of getting there, they see the value of a CUNY degree, but they're not getting either to a college degree, they're dropping out before they get that, or they're not getting to that kind of promising career that they really hoped for. And so we think that CUNY, as important as it is, there are steps that they need to take and that the city and state government need to support with resources to allow more of CUNY students to actually graduate and access the good jobs that are growing in New York City's economy, and that definitely includes tech. And so we see a significant improvement in the number of students that are getting technology degrees at CUNY. It's really doubled in the last decade or so. There's huge progress there. There's some challenges, though. Fairly low percentage of CUNY students that are graduating with tech degrees are getting jobs in the tech sector, right? Like, we need to do better, right? Not enough CUNY students that are studying in those technology degree programs are getting internships forget about apprenticeships, just internships, like over a summer at a technology company. And this is an industry, tech, where they're really looking to hire people that have had some background, some experience, not just in college, but in the industry. And so they often hire people that have had an internship. And CUNY doesn't have a lot of those right now. It's growing, and the chancellor has really embraced internships, but there's a lot more that we could be doing there. Thirdly, there's a fairly, an extremely low student to advisor ratio or advisor to student ratio at CUNY. And for a lot of students that are kind of considering what they're going to do in terms of getting an internship, getting a path to applying for a specific career or occupation, career advising is so helpful, but CUNY doesn't have that many of those career advisors.
Is that because of budgetary constraints, do you think?
I think so. CUNY's investing in a lot of different things, and that's why when we write about CUNY and we look at the opportunity to kind of put more students on the path to these great tech jobs, it's not all on CUNY, right? CUNY really is facing some significant financial challenges right now. City and state leaders need to see the value of expanding access to tech careers. And, I think one of the ways that we think about it is that there are very few things that New York City can do at scale more than supporting CUNY as a pathway into tech careers, right? We have tech training programs, but they're getting like a few people here and there into tech companies. CUNY has the potential to put thousands of more students into technology companies. Nowhere else can you have that scale than at CUNY, but there's these things that we need to work on and kind of improve.
When I think of fabulous role that CUNY plays in this city. Try to imagine this city without the City University of New York. And yet it seems to me that there is not the kind of fulsome appreciation of the importance of CUNY that I would like to see in this city and in this state, because the state has such a role to play in terms of financing and that sort of thing. Why there is not more appreciation for the role that they play, for the importance in the city and state of CUNY, and why there is not a much bigger effort to raise more money to support CUNY is beyond me. So if it's editorializing and if it sounds self-serving, too bad. That is the way that I feel.
No. I couldn't agree more, and let me give you one stat about this. Right now, today, 89% of residents of the Upper East Side have a bachelor's degree or higher form of education. In Mount Hope in the Bronx, it's 13%. We have huge disparities, and we're in an economy today where people are hiring folks with a college credential, right? So CUNY is the equalizer. It is the opportunity to get more New Yorkers into the middle class. It's an opportunity to furnish our employers with the skilled employees that they're looking for. We absolutely need to be investing more in CUNY, whether it's into these kind of fast-growing careers like in tech, but or just kind of getting people into the economy and getting them the skills to succeed some way or another.
We've only got about a minute left, but let's say someone goes through one of these tech apprenticeships, they complete the program, they do extremely well. What kind of employment can they expect at the end of that apprenticeship, and what kind of money would they be making?
Yeah, I mean, these are not like kind of introductory off the street roles. These are serious technology roles that apprenticeships are getting. Often we're seeing them getting jobs at $100,000 or more a year. In fact, one of the reasons we wrote about apprenticeships is when you look at all kinds of workforce development programs, none really have the same kind of elevator effect as apprenticeships. People that start from, let's say, making under $20,000 a year, people without a college degree, and getting to that kind of very well-paying job that's somewhere 75, 100,000 a year or more in many cases. When they leave these apprenticeships, they're hired by the companies that have kind of had that apprenticeship for a year or two. And there's a lot of opportunity for growth, and many of them end up mentoring other apprenticeships that come in the door.
So we've been speaking with Jonthan Bowles, and Jonthan, I really appreciate your coming in. We've run out of time, but it's been a real pleasure talking to you. And I hope you'll say yes when we ask you to come back.
I will. Thanks so much.
Thank you. Thank you for watching. I'm Bob Herbert, and I'll see you next time. CUNY TV now has an app. Downloading the CUNY TV app lets you join us anytime from anywhere.